King Charles III's visit to France has been postponed due to continued strikes and protests against Macron's pension reform.
More than 400 people were arrested across France on Thursday during protests against the government's unpopular pension reform.
King Charles III has postponed his visit to France, the first of the sovereign abroad, due to continued strikes and violent protests against the pension reform. The King of the United Kingdom was supposed to arrive in Paris on Sunday and stay in the country until Wednesday. But the Elysee has announced the postponement due to a new day of national mobilization planned for next Tuesday. Thursday marked the 9th day of demonstrations against the pension reform. In total, around 500 officers have been injured and the same amount of people arrested. Mountains of uncollected rubbish has been piling up on the streets of Paris while street fires illuminate the city at night. The decision has been made by the French and British governments and the trip is set to be rescheduled as soon as possible.
More than 400 people were arrested in France after a 9th general strike against the country's pension reform. One of them was an 18-year-old student, whose father says he was demonstrating peacefully.
En fait, il n'était pas à Opéra, donc il n'était même pas avec les Black Blocs, il était dans le cortège avec ses camarades lycéens. Et il y a eu cette charge hyper violente.
Some of the protesters' relatives and friends have denounced their detention, calling it arbitrary and unjustified.
Over 400 people have been detained across France on Thursday following demonstrations that have turned violent, and many remain in custody today. What you see behind me is friends and family members of people who are detained here in Paris's 17th district. Many have come here in the early hours of Friday to demand their loved ones' release and saying that what's happening here in this country is very worrying, that the government is using the police against its own people. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming days, but tensions are very high, with government officials multiplying statements today conveying their disappointment at this turn of events. Clearly, the government was expecting protests to die down following the adoption of that controversial reform of the pension system, but that is not what's been happening. Protesters yesterday, more than 3 million people in the streets of France, according to unions, saying that they're going to continue their fight until the government drops this reform, and have called for another major day of action on Tuesday. But we're also expecting more of these informal gatherings to continue over the next few days, over the next few evenings, and therefore more tension and more arrests. Annelies Boers is in Paris for Euronews.
The Israeli government has approved legislation that would protect the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from being deemed unfit to rule because of his corruption trial. He vowed to mend the rift in a nation deeply divided over his plans to overhaul the country's judiciary. But he offered no details and made clear his intention to press ahead.
אני מאמין שאפשר להעביר רפורמה שתיתן מענה לשני הצדדים. רפורמה שתשיב את האיזון הראוי בין הרשויות, ומנגד תשמור, אני אומר מעבר לזה, לא רק שתשמור, שתשריין את זכויות הפרט של כל אזרח ואזרחית במדינה.
But many thousands of protesters accuse the right-wing coalition of leading Israel towards an autocracy. Thursday's demonstrations were the latest in protests that have been going on for months. Critics of the reforms say Netanyahu has plunged the nation into one of its worst domestic crises in its almost 75-year history.
Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin claims that Ukraine has 200,000 reserves concentrating to attack along the entire eastern front line. Now, the Institute for the Study of War says Prigozhin's exaggerated statements about the imminent threat to Russian forces are likely an attempt to secure more supplies and reinforcements from the Russian Ministry of Defense to save his forces in Bakhmut. Prigozhin denied the Kremlin's claims that Russia is fighting NATO in Ukraine and questioned whether there are actually Nazis in Ukraine, as the Kremlin constantly claims. Prigozhin stated that Russia is fighting exclusively with Ukrainians and some what he called Russophobic mercenaries who voluntarily support Ukraine, but not NATO itself. Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander Alexander Syrsky stated that Wagner Group elements remain the main Russian force operating in the Bakhmut direction and that they have not yet lost their offensive capabilities. Syrsky noted that while Wagner forces still have a numerical advantage on the front line, Ukrainian forces continue to exhaust the mercenaries here. In the Avdiivka direction, Russian forces continue to form new brigades from legacy standing the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, breakaway Russia-controlled region units and mobilized personnel. Russian forces continue to attack Ukrainian positions around Avdiivka. The Institute for the Study of War is quoting a Russian source that is claiming that it is too early to speculate about Russian efforts to create a cauldron around Avdiivka and about operational successes in the area. Ukraine's top ground forces commander said that his forces would soon begin a counter-offensive after withstanding Russia's brutal winter campaign.
This is a RM-70 rocket launcher after repair and refurbishment. It is ready to be transferred from Police in the Czech Republic to the front lines of the conflict in Ukraine. However, it is not part of an aid package from the Czech government. It is the result of 1.2 million donations made by Czech citizens. The launcher can fire 40 missiles in 90 seconds and can reload exceptionally fast. After the full-scale invasion of Russia in February, they immediately started sending money to the Ukrainian embassy account. However, cash flow died down quickly.
Tak jsme založili celý ten projekt, kterému jsme dali jméno Dárek pro Putina a začali jsme dělat jako řízenou crowdfundingovou kampaň, v rámci které jsme začali prostě vybírat na jednotlivé konkrétní zbraně.
So far, anti-aircraft defense, tanks, drones and ammunition have been purchased, along with training of specialists and rescuers.
Problém je v tom, že ta příčina toho utrpení lidského je vojenská agrese a ta se nedá zastavit slovy, ta se musí zastavit činy.
In 1 year, more than 120,000 contributors have sent 442 million crowns or 18 million euros in aid to Ukraine.
To, že ty lidé o tom slyší, že vidí, že ostatní dávají, že ta situace na té Ukrajině skutečně vyžaduje to, že nemůžete jít proti prostě těm hordám ruských vojáků s holýma rukama, tak ta podpora médií je ohromně důležitá.
The Gift for Putin campaign is continuing successfully. Its next goal will be to fund the care for badly wounded Ukrainian soldiers.
Jiří Skácel, Euronews, Polička, Česká republika.
In the Austrian-Slovenian border region, livestock farmers say there's been a dramatic increase in the number of animals killed by wolves. Owners are entitled to government compensation, but they have to prove the killer was a wolf. This farmer received only a small part of the designated compensation because the identification tags on his sheep were lost during the killing.
Ich habe von diesen 17 Schafen nur von 4 die Schade bezahlt bekommen.
No proof means no money, Slovenia's government confirmed. This, despite the fact that the number of missing but uncompensated animals in the municipality recently tripled.
Die sind nicht sofort tot, die haben viel Schmerzen, die Schafe und so weiter. Es ist ein komplexes Problem, es ist nicht nur Geld.
Dieses Reh hier wurde vergangene Woche von einem Wolf getötet. Und mit diesem Kadaver versuchen die Jäger jetzt, einen Wolf in die Falle zu locken. Denn hier in Slowenien und im angrenzenden Österreich ist das Abschießen von gewissen Wölfen erlaubt.
Hybrids between dogs and wolves are especially targeted because they're more daring and will even enter villages during the day. But for the World Wildlife Fund, there is an upside to the presence of wolves, particularly in wooded areas. According to them, wolves protect the forests from being destroyed by deer.
Junge Bäume können oft gar nicht aufwachsen, können nicht das Erwachsenenalter erreichen, werden vom Wild vorher verbissen. Der Wolf würde hier helfen, diese hohe Zahl an Wild zu reduzieren.
Meanwhile, Mattia is considering giving up his remaining sheep. His passion for the hard work in the alpine terrain is dwindling in the face of wolf attacks.
It was in 2009, through a World Cup qualifier, that Turkish and Armenian leaders came together. An event which allowed for a warming of relations and declarations of good intentions. But 14 years later, the two countries still do not maintain diplomatic ties. The two nations meet again on Saturday, and is an opportunity to take stock of relations between the two neighbours, torn by history and the memory of the massacre of 1915.
Je doute fort qu'il y ait un véritable changement dans les relations bilatérales parce que Erdogan compte trop sur sa base électorale afin d'être reconduit président. Il s'appuie énormément sur un électorat ultranationaliste, donc ça c'est un facteur intérieur. Et vous avez le facteur géopolitique et l'alliance avec l'Azerbaïdjan.
Azerbaijan, a central actor in this issue, wants Armenia to recognise its sovereignty over the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. Ankara is in full solidarity with Baku on this issue, meaning Turkey is reluctant to reopen its border with Armenia, even if the Turkish opposition wins the presidential election next May. This is because nationalist parties are members of this coalition, like the Yi Party.
Le Yi Party est un parti issu du parti d'extrême droite nationaliste des Lougris, et ce parti, par exemple, serait très réticent à passer outre la volonté d'Azerbaïdjan. Donc, s'il y a un changement de gouvernement et de majorité, il ne faut pas trop s'attendre à des changements rapides et significatifs sur ces terrains-là.
In this context, a few symbolic moments of diplomacy have made it possible to establish a semblance of dialogue between Ankara and Yerevan, such as the aid provided by Armenia after the devastating earthquake in Turkey in early February.